Well, for more on this topic, we're joined by Marc A Ross. He's founder of consulting firm Caracal Global. Welcome back to the show.
Good to see you.
So, Marc, what stood out to you in terms of the highlights that came out of this intellectual property presser?
I think going back 10 years, every year China has certainly made continuing progress. It's certainly a priority in Beijing to improve intellectual property rights, not only for domestic companies, but also for foreign companies. So everything that is being said is positive. The trend lines are positive, but clearly more can be done.
And what more could be done, do you think?
I think overall, just the attitude in having harmonized judicial policy across the entire nation. The fact that they've introduced 19 innovation centers throughout the country is a positive step. You have a patchwork kind of situation. The laws aren't equally enforced throughout the country. So having a system where all the laws are equal throughout the country would be a very positive step.
So enforcement perhaps would be one thing to look at. What would you say some other strategies to really better protect intellectual property and reward these IP owners, but also making sure that customers and residents also get the benefits of innovation that's more affordable?
Well, I think you raised innovation is definitely key. China should definitely have the best access to the best technology, the best products, but also IP also deals with consumer safety. You want to make sure that the products being sold or the services are safe and won't cause any problems for the customer. So having strict IP enforcement allows that to make sure the customer knows what they're buying.
Now, what can be done to raise more awareness about the IP protections that are offered and the sort of resources that are available?
I think just continuously talking about it, obviously Beijing talking about it, making sure it's a priority not only for governments, but local governments, for businesses. I think this is going to take 10, 15 years. Introducing intellectual property rights is a new thing relatively. If you go back 10, 15 years, you're trying to erase almost 50, 60 years of history. It's going to take some time, but obviously continuing to talk about it is the first step.
And certainly the education and the policies are one part of it. But what about the implementation? What can be done to make sure that the implementation is most effective?
Yeah, I think the best thing they could do is have a unified system of courts where there's a central decision-making body where the laws apply equally across the country. I mentioned it before, enforcement is a real challenge. You may have different laws, not only in the same city, but even different in the same province. So having equal access to the law and the courts throughout the country would be a huge step forward for intellectual property rights.
Now let's look at this issue that keeps coming up of forced technology transfers by foreign tech firms. It's an accusation that we've seen the US level at China, but as we've heard repeatedly, China has this zero-tolerance policy on that across its sector. So why is there a disconnect or a misunderstanding about this issue?
Well, it's certainly an issue for those companies that do have to exchange technology to enter the market. That's clearly a problem. It's not for obviously every business. I think there's 8,000 joint ventures in China. Maybe about 1,000 of them have that problem. But for companies that do have that problem, it's a huge issue. It's definitely happening. I think it's positive what the central government is saying, but we'll see where that goes. There's obviously a lot of talk sometimes about economic reforms, but actually putting them in place is another thing.
So what do you think this means for foreign companies? When they hear these words coming from Li Keqiang and coming from other leaders in this space, what does that do for confidence?
It's definitely positive. There's no doubt about it, what is being said in Beijing, but it'd be much better to be heard that maybe at the provincial level or even the city level, where government officials there, or even businesses, are saying that we take intellectual property rights very seriously. When you see it outside of Beijing, I think that'll be a much more positive step for the entire economy and also for folks that want to invest in the Chinese marketplace.
And it's certainly in China's own interest to step up these protections. We saw that China's been investing heavily in research and development when it comes to things like AI, batteries, and really been stepping up the number of patents. So how do stronger rules protect both domestic and foreign companies?
If you're going to place a big bet, say artificial intelligence, if you're going to place a bet of $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, you want to make sure that investment comes back. If you and me went to a board of directors and say, hey, we're going to introduce this product, it may not be protected, it may be stolen, it may be tough for us to get investors. But having certainty in the market is a central point. As China moves up the economic ladder, it has some of the best companies in terms of software and AI, as you point out. They want to make sure that that investment is going to be protected and that they know the rules for not only 10, but 15, 20 years out. That's really key. So that commitment to intellectual property is really the core for China to move up the economic ladder.
So as China continues to boost the number of patents, what are some of the lessons it could perhaps learn from other countries that have got a better handle on this?
Well, I would say, follow what's happening in the United States. Certainly it's taken us a long time, but our judicial system really has an emphasis on when a court system decides an intellectual property case, it applies to the entire nation. I can't stress that enough. Also, allowing more Chinese companies to invest in the US or even in Germany would allow them to be exposed to kind of Western judicial systems that protect intellectual property.